Hello students, welcome back to class. I hope you are all doing fine, you are all well. Today in this condition, in this pandemic of the coronavirus, or as Donald Trump says, the China virus, since the virus originated in China, Donald Trump is now terming it as the China virus. What do you feel? What type of situation are you in? Are we all in? It seems so bad that we have to go through this phase of life. Everything seems to have come to a standstill. Perhaps we feel that our generation is such an unlucky generation to have seen this pandemic. But who knows? This might be a blessing in disguise. Who knows that the coronavirus might be saving the world from a greater disaster. Maybe it is nature's way of balancing things. The environment was getting so polluted, so much noise everywhere, so much smoke everywhere, so much pollution everywhere. The brink of war, trade war between two great nations, USA, China, then Russia on the other side, France, Germany, England. Everybody were trying to show or trying to prove their supremacy. But this virus has given us a very vital and a very important lesson that no matter which country, no matter how great, how advanced, a virus which is not even visible through the naked eye can bring the humanity, the whole human race on its knees. We are finding ourselves helpless after so many months of being infected by this virus, yet we are unable to find a vaccine for it. Many people do not believe in what they have not seen. Many people say that I will believe only if I see it. Again, to such people, this virus is an example that we cannot see the virus, yet we know that the virus is prevalent. The virus is there. So on this note, let's start an important chapter from our English textbook. Chapter number 6, An Angel in Disguise, by T.S. Arthur. T.S. Arthur, who is an American author, he was popular in the 19th century. He was popular for his stories, which were written with great compassion and sensitivity. He brought out the humanity which was supposed to be in all human beings. Especially, he taps the middle class, the respectable middle class life of America. In this story, An Angel in Disguise, T.S. Arthur, he brings out a very good story where Maggie, a frail child, a weak child, a sickly child, though she is sick and nobody would like to adopt such a sickly child, Through compassion, the wheelwright Joe Thompson and his vinegar tempered wife Jane, they adopt Maggie, and in a miraculous way, this sick child, she turns the table in the lives of the wheelwright Joe Thompson and his wife Jane. How their lives change for the good, we'll come to know when we read the story An Angel in Disguise. Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done their miserable work, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. She had fallen upon the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit and died in the presence of her frightened little ones. The story begins on a very sad note. The story begins describing a woman of not very good character. The woman has a lot of vices, a lot of negative qualities in her life. She was idle, she didn't do much work. On top of it all, she had bad habits, and she was always in a very bad temper. She could never get along with the people around her. So, as happens to such people, they are left to deal with their own self. When you don't do work, when you don't earn your living, you don't lead a very good life. And one day, she came drunk in the evening, and she fell at the very threshold, at the very entrance of the door, and she died in front of their children. Death touches the spring of all humanity. This woman had been despised, scoffed at, and angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. But now, as the fact of her death was passed from lip to lip in subdued tones, pity took the place of anger and sorrow of denunciation. So, no matter what life you have spent, no matter how bad you are, when a person dies, no matter what, how good or bad he was, everybody feels sorry for the dead. In the same way, though this woman was despised, though nobody in the village liked her, but the word was spread, whispering through the word of mouth from one person to the other. And everybody in the village knew that this ill-tempered, idle woman was no more. Neighbors went hastily to the old tumble-down hut in which she had secured little more than a place of shelter for summer heats, from summer heats and winter cold. Some with grave clothes for a decent interment of the body, and some with food for the half-starving children, 3 in number. Of these, John, the oldest, a boy of 12, was a stout lad, able to earn his living with any farmer. Kate, between 10 and 11, was bright and active, of whom something clever might be made, if in good hands. But poor little Maggie, the youngest, was hopelessly diseased. 2 years before, a fall from a window had injured her spine, and she had not been able to leave her bed since, except when lifted in the arms of her mother. So here the author, T.S. Arthur, he describes the condition in which the three children, the three orphans, who not so long ago lived with their mother who was despised, the mother who was not liked by anyone. But after her death, many of the villagers, they came to this hut. Some came with grave cloths so that they might give a proper burial to the human body. Some came with food for the living children, for the children who were three in number. Of these, John was the eldest. He was 12 years old. He was a stout boy, quite strong, and he was in a condition where he could earn his own living if some farmer gave him work. The second in number was Kate. Kate was 10 years. She was 2 years younger than John. She was between 10 and 11. She had crossed her 10. She was running 11. And she too was a very bright child, and something good could have been made out of Kate if she was with someone good. If a good person adopted her, something could have been made out of even Kate. But poor Maggie, the youngest one was Maggie. Her age is not mentioned here. Okay, she was hopelessly diseased. And how was she diseased? What happened to her? How she became sick? She happened to fall from the window. 2 years ago, she happened to fall from a window and had injured her spine. And since then, she was bedridden. She could move from the bed only with the help and assistance of her mother, when her mother carried her in her arms. What is to be done with the children? That was the chief question now. The dead mother would go underground and be forever beyond all care or concern of the villagers. But the children must not be left to starve. After considering the matter and talking it over with his wife, Farmer Jones said that he would take John and do well by him. Now that his mother was out of the way, and Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking out for a bound girl, concluded that it would be charitable in her to make choice of Catty, even though she was too young to be of much use for several years. So now the villagers were discussing what is to be done. They came to the common conclusion that the next day they would bury the mother, the dead mother. But what was to be done with these children? So Farmer Jones, he discussed with his wife, he took his wife's consent, and they agreed upon adopting John, because John was very healthy, quite strong, and he would be a helping hand to Farmer Jones. Mrs. Ellis was on the lookout for a slave girl, for a girl who would be working and staying in her house. So she thought of adopting Catty. But look at the way she is putting it, as if she is doing a favor to Catty. She says that Catty or Kate, she is not grown up enough, she is ill-tempered, she is not properly trained, but anyway she is willing to adopt her, though Catty would be of no use for several years. She goes on to say, I could do much better, I know, said Mrs. Ellis. But as no one seems inclined to take her, I must act from a sense of duty. Expect to have trouble with the child, for she is an undisciplined thing used to having her own way. But no one said, "I'll take Maggie." Pitying glances were cast on her wan and wasted form, and thoughts were troubled on her account. Mothers brought cast off garments, and removing her soiled, ragged clothes, dressed her in clean attire. The sad eyes and patient face of the little one touched many hearts and even knocked at them for entrance. But none opened to take her in. Who wanted a bedridden child? So, Farmer Jones adopted John, Mrs. Ellis adopted Catty, but nobody wanted to adopt poor little Maggie. And why they didn't want to adopt poor little Maggie? Because she was sick, because she was bedridden. Instead of being an asset, she would be a reliability. She would be a burden, they thought, to whoever adopted this sick child. Not that they did not have pity on her, not that they didn't feel sorry for her. They did feel sorry, they did have pity on her. Some people went and brought some old clothes and dressed her up, changing her soiled and dirty clothes. Some went and brought food for her. So they were feeling sorry for her, but nobody wanted to adopt her. The reason was she was bedridden, and they felt that if they adopted this girl, they would be taking trouble into their house, into their families. "Take her to the poorhouse," said a rough man, of whom the question, "What's to be done with Maggie?" was asked. "Nobody is going to be bothered with her. The poorhouse is a sad place for a sick and helpless child," answered another. "For your child or mine?" said the other guy, lightly speaking. "But for this brat, it'll prove a blessed change. She will be kept clean, have healthy food, and be doctored, which is more than can be said of her past condition." So now they were discussing what is to be done with poor Maggie. So the man with a rough voice, with a rough posterior, with a rough exterior, he says that take her to the poor house. That means put her in the orphanage, where those who have nobody to take care of them, they are kept there, like the old home, the orphanage home. So also is the poor home. So he felt that this place would be a better place, and Maggie would be living in a better condition than what she was living in the past. When somebody asks or somebody tells him that the poor house is not a good place for a sick child, so he says at least it is much better than what life she was leading before. There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. The day following the day of death was made the day of burial. There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. The day following the day of the death was made the day of burial. A few neighbors were at the miserable hovel, but none followed dead cart as it bore the unhonored remains of its pauper grave to its pauper grave. Farmer Jones, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away, satisfied that he had done his part. Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air. "Bid your sister goodbye. and drew the tearful children apart before scarcely their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. Hastily, others went out, some glancing at Maggie and some resolutely refraining from a look, until all had gone. She was alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hasting off with the rest, "It's a cruel thing to leave her so. Then take her to the poorhouse. She'll have to go there," answered the blacksmith's wife, springing away and leaving Joe behind. So, it was decided that they would send poor Maggie to the poorhouse. But still, people were not satisfied. But what else could they do? So they decided that the next day they will bury the corpse, bury the dead body of the poor woman, the ill-fated woman, the woman who everybody despised, the mother of these three children. And a cart was ordered for. They put the body in the cart, and the cart drove to the grave. It was a very ordinary grave. It's mentioned as a pauper grave, a very poor grave, just mud and bricks. She was buried, nobody followed the cart. And as soon as people felt that the responsibility was over, they began to leave the house one by one. Farmer Jones, he took John and he went. Mrs. Ellis, she asked Kate to bid farewell to her sister, and barely they were able to kiss one another before they could leave. She pulled Kate away and she was gone. Once Mrs. Ellis was gone, everybody, they tried to hurriedly leave this place because nobody wanted to take the responsibility of this poor child, this poor little girl, Maggie. They felt that they might be overwhelmed and they might take this child home. So they decided better leave as fast as possible. At the end, towards the end, the last person to leave, the two last persons to leave were Joe Thompson and another was the blacksmith's wife. So at the threshold, Joe Thompson asked the blacksmith's wife, what is to be done with this poor little girl? So the blacksmith wife said that it's better that you leave. That means Joe Thompson should leave her to the poorhouse. And then she goes. Then take her to the poorhouse. She said it's a cruel thing to leave the poor little girl like this. So she says you better take her to the poorhouse, and she too ran away from there, went away from there, leaving Joe Thompson behind. So today we'll pause here, we'll take a pause here, and then we'll continue this in the next lecture.